Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Ugh, I jinxed myself last week, didn't I? Yep. Nothing bad has happened to me, don't worry. I can't believe I said that, and YouTube was like, hold on a minute. So as most of you are probably aware, YouTube did restrict last week's original video and it was just such a kerfuffle. I had to take the video down, try and re-edit it, try and figure out what the restriction was. So I just want to say thank you so much for your support on last week's video. It means so much. You guys are so patient, so understanding. And I've actually been having these difficulties with YouTube all year and I've never spoken about it. I mean, I've hinted a little bit that YouTube hate me this year, but I've never really spoken about it. But after last week, I feel like I need to kind of let you guys know what has been going on. Basically, YouTube have been restricting my content all year. They have also been demonetizing pretty much all of my videos as well, but true crime content was always really hard to monetize, but this year more than ever it has been pretty much impossible. And a restriction, if you don't know, is basically YouTube doesn't like something in the video, so they restrict it. They try their best to hide your video, to suppress your video, to make sure that no one watches your video, which means that they don't send out notifications, they don't let your subscribers know that you have a video up, they don't put your video on home pages, in browse features, in suggested videos. Sometimes you can't even watch my restricted videos if you're not signed into YouTube. So the only place that you can find my restricted videos is in your subscription feed, or if you go directly to my YouTube channel. So my restricted videos obviously do still get views, but nowhere near the amount of views that they should be getting. And it's been having a very negative effect on the channel. And I haven't spoken about this before because I don't want to come across as a YouTuber that just complains or moans about YouTube, because I don't want to do that. I've just been trying to figure it out behind the scenes and try and figure out what I'm doing wrong, because the last thing that I want to do is censor myself. I'm not going to do that. I'm not. But I just feel like YouTube is literally backing me into a corner and wants me to censor myself. But I just want to thank every single one of you that did watch the original video last week and then came back when I re-uploaded it and watched it again, or had it playing on in the background, or just gave it a like or a comment. I just want to say a huge thank you. You don't know how much that means to me, because I was so stressed last week. I really truly do have the best viewers in the world. Like, seriously, thank you so much. I feel like I'm going to get emotional. I pour my heart and soul into these videos and I work so hard and I love doing what I do, but YouTube has just been making it so difficult this year. And how supportive all of you were last week. I just want to say thank you so much. So let's get on to today's video. Fingers crossed YouTube likes this one. Ugh. So today's case is our third and final Halloween case, and I have saved the worst for last. The evil man at the center of today's case is truly one of the most disturbing men that I have ever come across, and that is a man called Peter Kurten. And I honestly just don't even know where to begin. Like, I don't even know how to prepare you for today's case. I don't even know how to give you a little bit of a taste. Oh no, that was the wrong word for me to use for today's case. So just think about every video that we have done on this channel, every kind of crime and interest, let's just say. This case involves it all. Peter Kurten was probably one of the most sexually motivated perpetrators I've ever come across. He actually has a nickname of King of the Perverts. And one thing Peter was aroused by was blood. That was one of his things, one of many, truly. This man is so sick and disgusting. Oh. And he got so excited about blood, about the thought of blood, that he would spontaneously climax wherever he was. Oh yeah, we're in for a roller coaster of a case today. And he was so obsessed with blood that he got the nickname the Vampire of Düsseldorf. So that is what we are going to be talking about today, and I'm going to tell you now, do not eat. Like, this is your no eating warning, people. Like, seriously, no. So that is your warning. Do not blame me, okay? So let's just jump in. So I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is HelloFresh. So you guys know how much I love HelloFresh. I have been using HelloFresh for the longest time now. I truly don't know how I used to live without it. And if you haven't tried HelloFresh, I highly recommend it. It just takes so much stress out of dinner time. With HelloFresh, you get delicious recipes recipes delivered right to your door every single week. And it just makes meal times so much easier because you don't have to stress, you don't have to plan what to have for dinner, you don't have to go out and get all of the ingredients. HelloFresh literally covers all of that. All of the ingredients come pre-portioned and all of the recipes come in their own separate little bag. So it is so simple. You literally just pull the bag out of your cupboard and you get cooking. There is a recipe card for each meal that you choose, and the recipe cards have pictures, which I really appreciate. So it makes it super easy to follow along. There is less prep, less cleanup, and also less food waste, which is obviously super important. They also have an amazing app that easily allows you to manage all of your meals, and you can see all of the weeks coming up for me and all of the meals I have chosen. I absolutely love choosing my meals each week. I am just one of those people that I look forward to when the menus get released and I choose my meals straight away. And it's literally just like you're choosing meals off a menu. Like, look at this. Isn't this just so satisfying? Like choosing your meals each week. Look at it. And also the meals are so incredible. I had the halloumi burger again this week, and oh my God, that is one of my favorite meals. I actually showed you guys that meal in my last sponsor with HelloFresh, and it's just so good. So if that meal comes up, the halloumi burger, oh my God, you need to try it. And they have so much variety. There is something for everyone. Whatever your dietary needs are, whatever your tastes are, there is going to be meals that you love. And another meal that I had this week was the classic creamy pasta primavera, and it was so easy to cook. It literally took me like 20 minutes, and me and Ashley cooked it together, and it was just a lifesaver because we were both busy working late, and just to have a really nice meal that is only going to take us 20 minutes to cook is just so convenient. And honestly, having HelloFresh has taken a huge problem out of our lives of trying to figure out what we want for dinner. And if you guys wanted to try out HelloFresh for yourself, go to hellofresh.com or scan the QR code that is on your screen now and use code Danielle Kirsty for 16 free meals. That's hellofresh.com or scan the QR code and use code Danielle Kirsty for 16 free meals. And my code now works worldwide. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, if you can get HelloFresh, you can now use my code. And you guys can get a different special discount depending on where you're watching from. And using my code really does help out this channel because it lets HelloFresh know that you came from this video. So I just want to thank HelloFresh again for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into our final spooky case of October. Peter Kurten was born on the 26th of May, 1883. You heard that right, 1883, making him a Gemini. And we don't normally cover people born in the 1800s. And the main reason why we don't do a lot of old cases is because you can't normally find a lot of detail on old cases. But that is not the case for Peter Kurten. Oh no, we have almost too many details for today's case. Too many disturbing details, too many details. I can't believe I am going to talk about what I'm about to talk about. And like normally I give warnings like for my videos, like I just want to warn you that this is going to come up or this is going to come up. And truly, I need to just give you a warning on everything. Like pretty much everything that you can think of happened in this case. So it's not going to be for everybody. So yeah, I can't give a warning for today's case because there's just too much that happens. So Peter was born in the city of Mulheim in Germany. And this is actually the second time we're going to Germany this month. And Peter grew up the eldest of 13 siblings. But Peter, he did not have a good home life at all. His dad was a sand molder and he barely earned any money doing this. And his mom was a stay-at-home mom looking after all the bloody kids. And Peter's dad was not a good person. No, not at all. His dad was a monster, like truly. Now, his dad barely earned any money. And obviously this is a very big family, 13 children, obviously the two parents. But Peter's dad, all of his money, he would actually spend on himself. He would get blind drunk every single day. There would only be a small amount of money left over for the children and for the family. A lot of the time the children would be starving. They also lived in a very small home. It was a 1-bedroom apartment and 1 bedroom for 13 children, for 15 people. And when Peter's dad would drink, he became very angry and very aggressive. He would break things around the house. He would beat his wife black and blue. He would also abuse the children as well. And Peter, being the oldest, he always got it the worst. And of course, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, children, there was no privacy. And this next thing that happens, oh my God, oh God, so disgusting. So not only did Peter's dad beat up his wife, he would also rape her every single day. But he would rape her in front of the children. Peter's dad actually forced the children to line up in the bedroom, and then he would order his wife to strip naked, and then he would rape his wife in front of his children. Oh my God, like what the hell? It's almost like he got a sick and twisted thrill by his children watching what was going on. And this happened pretty much every single day. But it wasn't his wife that was the only victim of sexual abuse, because Peter's dad would also rape his daughters. And he forced his children to watch this as well. And he got away with this for years. And this is Peter's first exposure to sex, which is obviously not healthy, is it? This whole experience with his dad and the way his dad would treat women would really shape Peter, and how he also treated women when he grew up. But not even when he grew up, to be honest. No. So now we get to Peter when he is 9 years old. And Peter has been exposed to physical and sexual assault from a very young age, because he's only 9 right now. But when he is 9, something so shocking happens. I can't believe that this next thing happens. Because when Peter was 9 years old, he had a habit of running away from home. He wanted to get away from his dad, which I don't think any of us can blame him. And he would quite often run away to nearby woods, and he would sometimes spend days there just camping out, hiding from his dad. And as a 9-year-old, Peter turned to crime. He would pickpocket, he would burgle homes. However, those were not the worst of his crimes. No, no, no. Because when Peter would run away to the woods, he would come across other children that he befriended. And there was one day where Peter was with another boy, and they were playing near a river. And they had made these like homemade rafts out of logs, and they got onto these rafts and they were going down the river. They were just being normal young children, you know, messing around, playing, having fun. However, on this day, the river was very choppy. It wasn't the best conditions. They shouldn't really have even been out on the river. And for some unknown reason, Peter all of a sudden got an urge to push his friend off the raft and into the water. He just got this urge. He wanted to see what would happen. So this is exactly what he did. He pushed his friend into the river. Now his friend desperately tried to climb back into the raft, and you would think that Peter would think, oh no, like what have I just done, and help his friend back on the raft. But that is not what Peter did. He saw his friend struggling, desperately trying to get back on the raft, and Peter intentionally steered the raft over his friend, trapping his friend in the water. And Peter just sat there so calmly on his raft, waiting for his friend to drown. And very sadly, that is what happened, and the poor boy lost his life. At 9 years old, Peter has just murdered his friend. This is how young Peter starts. Like, he's only 9 years old and he's already showing signs that he's disturbed and he's sadistic and he likes to watch people suffer. And in the end, the death was ruled an accident, because no one would ever suspect a 9-year-old of pushing in another 9-year-old and then just intentionally watching them drown. No one would ever think that. And also, because the water was very choppy that day, people genuinely did think that it was an accident. So because it was ruled an accident, Peter faced no consequences. So he decided to do it again. Yep, he decided to murder another friend in the exact same way. This time, Peter went out rafting with a friend, and he intentionally pushed this friend into the water. Now, the current of the river was way too strong for his friend. I don't think his friend could swim, and the boy was pulled under the water and never seen again. Again, this death was ruled as an accident, and at the age of only 9 years old, Peter has murdered 2 boys, and I just can't believe it. I really truly can't believe it. I think he liked the thrill of getting away with his crimes, and that will definitely become apparent in this case. So we now get to 1894. Yes, we are still in the 1800s. And at this point, Peter's family relocate about 20 miles south to the city of Düsseldorf, which is obviously where the rest of today's case takes place. And the family relocated because Peter's dad had really hoped to get a better job that paid a little bit more money. He hoped to get a bigger house for the family, and the family would just be a little bit more comfortable. But did that happen? No, because I think he did get a better job, and I think he did earn a little bit more money, but all of that money just went on himself. He would still continue to spend all of his money on alcohol. And he continued being a very violent person, a very abusive person. He continued raping his wife most nights in front of the children. And he also continued on sexually assaulting his daughters. And Peter, when he moves to Düsseldorf, he continues running away from home because he absolutely hates his dad. And it's just really ironic, isn't it, that he hates his dad, yet he pretty much turns into him. And by the time Peter gets to 14 years old, his dad is actually arrested. Peter's dad is arrested for raping his oldest daughter, who was only 13 years old. But he is only charged with incest, which I think is crazy. He's not charged with rape. And I'm just like, how can you not charge him with rape? Like, are you being serious? And he was only sent to prison for 18 months. So when his dad went to prison, Peter returned home because he wanted to step up for his family. He wanted to almost be the father figure that nobody had ever had. He wanted to help out. He wanted to get a job. He wanted to prove to his mom, to his family, that they didn't need his dad. And unfortunately, when Peter is 14 years old, this is when a very significant milestone happens, because Peter finally discovers his sexual appetite. But it wasn't his first sexual awakening, if you want to call it that. That actually happened when Peter was 9 years old. So we're going back in time a little bit, but it made more sense for me to tell you this now. So when Peter was 9 years old, he developed a very creepy and disturbing relationship with a neighbor who happened to be a dog catcher, which sounds so weird. But again, I have to remember what year we're in. So this neighbor was a dog catcher, and like the job title suggests, he would go out and catch dogs that were obviously wild or abandoned, whatever. However, this neighbor, he was not an animal lover. No, this man, this creepy neighbor, he actually hated animals. And he also seemed to have a very sick and twisted interest in bestiality. So Peter would help out this creepy neighbor catch dogs from time to time. This is when Peter was exposed to some things that nobody should ever be exposed to. And I've got to warn you about this next bit. It is really not nice to hear. So whenever Peter and this man would go out dog catching, whenever they would catch a dog, instead of like taking the dog to a dog shelter or trying to rehome the dog or anything like that, the man would actually break the dog's tail to see if the dog was healthy. And I truly don't know why breaking a dog's tail indicates whether they're healthy or not. I don't understand that, but that is just what I read. So this man would break a dog's tail to see if they were healthy or not. Then the man would slaughter the dog, eat the flesh of the dog, and then turn the fat from the dog into lard and sell it on the local market, which is just absolutely horrific. And Peter actually started to get a sick and twisted thrill from watching this, from watching these dogs being tortured. But that is not the only thing that the man would do, because obviously, like I have said, he is into bestiality, and this completely mesmerized Peter, because whenever they caught a dog, the man would tell Peter that there was only one way to make a dog like you. I actually cannot believe that these words are going to leave my mouth. The man would then play with the dog's genitals until they ejaculated. And that just makes me feel so sick. And this sick and twisted man got an enjoyment out of this. But then Peter, as a 9-year-old, also started to enjoy this. And Peter learned this practice from this man. This was Peter's introduction into bestiality. And it wasn't long until Peter was carrying out these practices on his own. So now we get back to Peter as a 14-year-old. And it was at this point where Peter, he had already been thinking about sex way too much from a very young age, because he has been exposed to sex from pretty much birth. So Peter was thinking now about exploring sex for himself. And he wanted to explore sex with another girl at his school. So he would go up to girls and he would just start talking to them about sex. And he would literally just proposition them right there and then and say things like, do you want to have sex? And of course, the majority of girls said no. But then at some point, one girl did agree to have sex with Peter. So the two of them, they went off to have sex. However, the girl, she started to refuse, and she started to squirm and move around too much. And the girl resisted, and the sex, it never happened. So after Peter was rejected from pretty much every single girl that he propositioned, Peter realized that he wasn't going to be able to have sex with a girl. And this is when Peter cast his mind back to the creepy dog catcher and how, as a 9-year-old, he would become sexually aroused by torturing animals, by sexually assaulting animals. So one day, Peter, he's only 14 years old, he was walking through some woods and apparently a squirrel jumped on him and bit his finger. And Peter couldn't shake the squirrel off. Apparently, the squirrel's teeth were lodged deep into his finger. So instead, Peter grabbed the squirrel by the neck and just started squeezing and essentially was strangling this squirrel. And the squirrel, it wasn't long until it went limp and it lost its life. And Peter instantly ejaculated. Yeah, he instantly ejaculated at killing a squirrel. All of the years that Peter had spent with the dog catcher, Peter had linked animal torture and just torture in general with sexual arousal. So it was after this incident with the squirrel that Peter decided to explore bestiality even more. And again, I'm going to have to warn you about this next bit. Oh God, this case, it's just too much. So after the whole squirrel incident, Peter snuck onto a nearby farm that had some sheep in a pen, and Peter just started to have sex with one of the sheep. It's like, oh my God, I don't even want to think about this. Like, I really don't. And Peter was loving this. He loved having sex with sheep, and he would actually go back to this farm most days and have sex with sheep. But that's not the worst of it. That's just not the worst of it, because over time, this wasn't arousing Peter enough anymore. Like, he was bored of just having sex with sheep. He was now starting to think about harming the sheep, and that was sexually arousing him. The thought of torture, the thought of harming an animal. So Peter did his normal routine. He snuck onto a farm and he started to have sex with one of the sheep, but this time he brought a knife along with him. And whilst Peter was having sex with the sheep, he pulled out his knife. And I'm really sorry if you guys are like picturing this in your head right now. Oh God, none of us want to think about this. So Peter pulled out his knife as he's having sex with the sheep, and then he stabbed the sheep whilst he's having sex with it, and the sheep started pouring with blood, and at the sight of the blood, Peter immediately ejaculated. He got such a thrill from seeing the blood that he just couldn't control himself anymore. So this became his new routine. He would sneak onto a farm, start to have sex with a sheep, and then he would stab them midway through. He would see the blood and then he would ejaculate. And it actually escalated so far that Peter wouldn't have sex with the sheep anymore, because it wasn't actually the sex that excited him anymore, it was just the blood. So then his new routine was to sneak onto a farm and just kill a sheep essentially and see the blood, and then he would ejaculate. It really was the torture, the harm and the blood that got him going, not sex. He even moved on to pigs at one point because he got bored of sheep. And then there was one time when Peter was strolling through a park and he came across a swan. He managed to catch the swan, I don't know how, and he cut the poor bird's head off. And he then got a sudden urge to drink the blood from the swan's neck. And this is what he did. In Peter's own words, he said, quote, drank the blood from the stump of the swan's neck. And as he started to drink the blood, he instantly ejaculated. And I am going to say the word ejaculated 50 million times in this video if you haven't already figured that out. And this was Peter's whole life for 2 years. He would find some sort of animal, whether it was on a farm or in a park, and sometimes he would still have sex with them, but most of the time he would just kill them, see their blood and ejaculate. And it was over these 2 years that Peter did realize that it was the sight of blood that truly excited him. He would just spontaneously ejaculate sometimes thinking about blood. And this was the start of Peter Kurten's sick and twisted obsession with blood. And this will now unfortunately be a running theme throughout the rest of this video, and I think you can all possibly understand why he has the nickname the Vampire of Düsseldorf. So we now get to 1901. We are finally in the 1900s. Peter is currently 18 years old, and just over those few years he had continued on his assaults on animals. At some point in those few years as well, his dad did get released from prison, but his dad was the same person that he was before he went to prison. He was still a monster. He never learnt his lesson. He carried on beating up his children and his wife, and also sexually assaulting his wife and also his children. And then finally, when Peter was 18 years old, his mom filed for divorce and she took the children and left. And Peter also decided that it was time for him to leave home as well. So he set out on his own. He moved to a town just outside of Düsseldorf, and something pretty significant happened because this is when Peter got his first official girlfriend. Peter decided that it was finally time to move on from animals. So his girlfriend was a sex worker. She was 2 years older than him, and the two of them started to have sex. From my understanding, this possibly was the first human that Peter had sex with. But this was just regular sex, you know, didn't excite him at all. There was no violence involved, there was no animals, there was no blood. So Peter decided to start beating his girlfriend during sex. And it started off like not too much, and his girlfriend, she agreed to it at the time. She agreed to the slight beating, she agreed to like the odd bit of choking, and it kept escalating beyond what she was comfortable with. And he choked her so hard one time that she almost died. And the girlfriend, after that incident where she nearly died, she thought, yeah, I'm out. I can't deal with this anymore. And she actually went to the police, reported Peter. Peter was arrested and sent to jail for 1 week. So as soon as Peter gets out of jail, he jumps into another relationship very quickly. And this was with an older woman who had a 16-year-old daughter. And the fact that she has a 16-year-old daughter is pretty relevant. So remember this. And the same thing pretty much happens all over again. The sex is too boring for Peter, so he starts to beat his new girlfriend, starts to choke her. Again, at first, his girlfriend kind of puts up with what he's doing. But then there was one time where she resisted and Peter threatened to kill her. She left him, and luckily, Peter actually went to jail for theft, so unrelated to what he was doing to his girlfriend. But he went to prison for 8 months, which is just really ironic, isn't it? He went to jail for 1 week for beating up his girlfriend, choking her and nearly killing her, but then he goes to jail for 8 months for theft. I think some people need to sort out their priorities. So then he gets out of prison and he goes back to the older woman. However, he doesn't start a relationship up again with the older woman. No, he actually starts up a relationship with her 16-year-old daughter, which is why I said that it was very significant that she had a daughter. And she's only 16. Like, seriously, I know it's like 1901. Possibly 1902 right now, but I don't care. She's a child. Like, I don't know what the age of consent was back then, but I don't bloody care. She is a child. She's very vulnerable. But Peter took complete advantage that she was only 16 and immediately started to have extremely violent sex with her. I can only imagine that this was not with her consent because she's a child. So then one day, the 16-year-old, she told her mom what was going on and she decided to leave Peter. So the 16-year-old girl and the mom walked out of the front door, but Peter was not happy about this whatsoever. He actually picked up a gun and started shooting at them as they fled. Now, thankfully, Peter, he doesn't seem to be the best aim, so thankfully he didn't hit them. But he got so excited that he was shooting at the two of them that he ejaculated into his pants. And it's like, oh my God, what is wrong with this man? But the shooting and ejaculation doesn't stop there. Oh no, because now Peter has associated shooting a gun, firing a gun, with ejaculation. So he started to have this fantasy about a girl that he went to school with, and he started fantasizing about shooting her. Now, maybe this was one of the girls that turned him down for sex. Maybe he had a little bit of a grudge against one of the girls that turned him down. I just don't know. But his fantasy was that he wanted to shoot this girl that he went to school with. But it wasn't just a fantasy. No, he wanted to actually carry this out in real life. So he managed to track down this exact girl that he went to school with and where she lived. He camped outside of her house, spent days stalking her, watching her, learning her routine. And then one day she got out of bed, Peter was watching, and he shot at her through her window and he ejaculated. Now, thankfully, like I said, Peter doesn't seem to have the best shot, so the girl was fine, she survived. And he was actually arrested and sent to prison for this. But after everything that he has done, like literally, he has just tried to kill somebody, he is only sent to prison for 1 year. Like, he gets out after 1 year. So now we get to 1905 and a lot of things happen in a very short space of time. So first of all, 22-year-old Peter joins the army. He joined the German army and he was sent to serve in France. However, Peter, he didn't really like the army life. I mean, he's a narcissist and he loves to be in control. So he went AWOL. And after running away from the army, this is when Peter discovered that he also got a sexual pleasure from arson. This man gets a sexual pleasure from everything, like truly. Peter goes round and sets fire to as many things as he possibly can. He would set fire to haystacks in fields. He would actually set fire to barns with animals inside. And he actually got a kick out of knowing that he was killing animals in this barn. And he was just setting fire to things left, right, and centre. And he actually did get arrested. And I'm not sure if he got arrested for arson or theft. Like, I just don't know. But it was one of the two. So when he got arrested for theft or arson, this is when they found out that he had gone AWOL from the army. So they decided to make his punishment even harsher and he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. So Peter goes to prison for 8 years, which is pretty much the whole of his 20s. And when he was in prison, let's just say that he underwent another significant transformation. Because one thing about Peter is that he loves to talk. And he soon found a group of fellow sex offenders in prison. No wonder they called him the king of the perverts, because he literally had all of these other sex offenders captivated by all of his conquests. Peter would actually give advice to the other sex offenders on how they could commit crime better, how they could be more sadistic, how they wouldn't get caught. And he also told one of his inmates a very disturbing story. He said to one of his inmates that he bit into a woman's genitalia and it started bleeding, and then Peter drank the blood. And Peter acted out this whole scene and everything for his fellow inmates like he's in drama school. And he actually said to them, quote, "That's the greatest enjoyment one can get. Take with that what you will." I don't know how true that is. But like I just said, Peter, he's a narcissist. He doesn't like to be told what to do. He likes to be in control. So prison is probably not the best place for him. So because he rebelled a lot against the prison guards, he was always getting into trouble and he was always put in solitary confinement. And the prison guards, they didn't treat Peter very well at all. They would actually torture Peter whilst he was in prison, and he would be put in solitary confinement for extremely long periods of time. He was given no food. He was chained to his bed at one point for 3 weeks straight. And Peter hated this treatment so much. He actually tried to take his own life one time but was unsuccessful, and he tried to cut into one of his main arteries to bleed out, but he didn't cut deep enough. However, once Peter saw his own blood, he became incredibly excited and aroused. And when he was taken to the hospital wing, he just kept talking to the doctors about his blood. He wanted to know as much information about his blood as he possibly could. He was saying, "How much blood did I lose? What is my blood type? Do I have strong blood?" So after his attempt on his life, when he was taken back into solitary confinement, Peter decided to pass the time by pleasuring himself whilst thinking about his sexual fantasies. However, Peter's sexual fantasies were about blood, were about killing people, torture, murder. One of the main fantasies that he would have was that when he was outside, he was in a group, like a very large group of people, and he had a knife on him, and he started running up to people and just started stabbing them. And he went up to one woman and just slit her stomach open, and she would just start pouring with blood. And when Peter would imagine this, he would just ejaculate instantly. And Peter, let's be realistic, he's already pretty messed up before he's gone into prison. However, when he went to prison for this 8-year stint, being in solitary confinement so much and Peter being left with his own thoughts only made him worse. The fact that he only had his own company, his own dark thoughts to keep him occupied, it had a very significant transformation on him. And I do think that this 8-year prison sentence is what really transformed Peter Kurten into the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Even though, let's be realistic, I think he probably would have ended up the Vampire of Düsseldorf without this prison sentence. I just think it kind of escalated things. I mean, we obviously know he's already committed murder as a child and he's already tried to shoot people and kill them, but it was in prison that he actually really did start to associate murder and blood with pleasure. And that would go on to dictate the rest of his life. So now we get to 1913, and 30-year-old Peter Kurten is released from prison. And after all of those years of solitary confinement, of fantasizing about murder, what does he go and do? He wants to commit murder for real. And I do need to warn you now, this case, I mean, it's already been intense. However, we are going to be talking about children, because Peter does like to target children, unfortunately. So on the 25th of May, 1913, Peter broke into a house in the city of Cologne. And I think his intention was to burglarize the home, to steal any valuables. I don't actually think he went into this home intending to murder somebody. But after searching the home, there was no valuables there. And this is when he stumbled into the bedroom of a child, a young girl called Christine Klein. Now, Christine was only 10 years old. She was sound asleep in the comfort of her own home. And as soon as Peter saw Christine, his strong desires and urges and fantasies about committing murder took over him. So Peter went up to Christine and he placed his hands around her neck and he just started to choke her. Christine woke with a jolt. She had no idea what was going on. She started screaming and shouting, but very sadly her parents did not wake up. And to be honest, I don't think it would have mattered if her parents had woken up. I don't think Peter would have stopped, and I think Peter probably would have just murdered her parents as well. But Christine, she started scratching at Peter's arms, really fighting for her life, trying to break free. But after a couple of minutes, Christine passed out. And what Peter did next is just truly, truly horrific. Because in his own words, he has said that he, quote, penetrated her genitalia before pulling out his pocket knife and slashing her throat from left to right, and then blood started gushing from her neck. And as soon as Peter saw that blood, he ejaculated. And sadly, it was in that moment that 10-year-old Christine Klein lost her life. And following this, Peter fled the scene. And the next day, he boldly returned to the scene of the crime because he wanted to see what was going on. He was nosy. He wanted to see if the police had found Christine yet. What were they saying? Who did they suspect did it? And he just stood there from the other side of the road watching the police investigate. He actually went into the pub across the road from Christine's home and he just started watching. And in the pub, he could hear other customers talking about the murder and talking about how horrific it was that this 10-year-old girl had been murdered. And Peter was overhearing all of these conversations. And Peter got such a thrill from hearing people talking about his crimes that he ejaculated right there and then in his pants. I can't with this man. And a few days after Christine had been murdered, it was her funeral. And after the funeral, Peter would go to Christine's grave every single day and he would touch the soil on her grave. And guess what happened when he touched the soil that was on top of her coffin? He ejaculated. Seriously, what the hell is wrong with this man? And he would do this every day. He would go back to her grave and touch the soil and he would ejaculate. And if you're wondering about the police investigation into Christine's murder, did they even suspect Peter? The answer would be no. Unfortunately, Christine's uncle was accused of her murder because the day before she had been murdered, Christine's uncle had a big argument with the family and they had all fallen out with the uncle. And he was the only suspect. He was the only one that had fallen out with the family in recent times. So people thought that the uncle was trying to get revenge, but obviously the uncle was completely innocent. But the uncle was arrested and falsely charged with murder. And it's just really frustrating, isn't it? Because if this murder had happened today, Christine was fighting back against Peter and she was scratching his arms and getting his DNA under her fingernails. The police would have DNA of the murderer and it would be easier to catch Peter, but obviously we're in 1913. They don't even have the ability to test DNA in 1913. They have none of that. And because Peter got away with this murder, it gave him the confidence to go out and do it again and again and again and again. Over the next few months, Peter actually goes out on a vicious, violent spree of attacks that resulted in many possible murders. We actually don't have any confirmed murders from this assault spree that Peter goes on. However, it is likely that he murdered some of these people. So Peter armed himself with an axe. Yes, you heard that right, an axe. And he headed out onto the streets of Düsseldorf to attack at will. Like literally, he didn't care who he attacked. And he just started attacking people left, right and centre. Like literally he would run up to people and just hit them over the head with an axe and then run off. And that is why I say possible murders, because the likelihood that you survive an attack with an axe to the head is obviously very small, especially in 1913 when medical advancements are nowhere near as good as they are today, but we have no confirmed murders. So there was one time when a woman was walking home at night and she reached her front door and Peter ran up behind her and smashed her over the head with an axe. She fell to the floor, she was bleeding and everything, and Peter just ran away. And we don't know if he murdered her. We don't know if she survived. There was another time when Peter actually went on a date with a woman and Peter asked this woman if she wanted to go on a stroll through the woods. So when Peter had her isolated, he stole her earrings and then raped her, and then he ran off. And as far as I'm aware, he didn't attack her with an axe, but that is just another assault that he has committed. There was another occasion where Peter was just strolling through the park late at night and he saw a man sitting on his own on a park bench, and Peter went up behind him and smashed him as hard as he could over the back of the head with an axe. Peter then ran away and hid in some nearby bushes so he could watch the aftermath, and this man had obviously fallen over and his head was gushing with blood. Like, I can't even tell you how much blood was coming from this head. So it is likely that this man did lose his life before someone could get to him to help him, but again we have no confirmation of that. And when Peter was watching this, he was watching the blood coming out of this man's head. He ejaculated, and then on his way home after that attack, he was so incredibly excited that he just couldn't contain himself that he set fire to a haystack that a homeless man was sleeping on. And again, did Peter kill this man? Did he burn this man alive? We just don't know. So Peter could have murdered 3 more people that we know about, if not more. And this is on top of the murder of Christine, and then on top of the 2 murders that he committed as a child. So we possibly have maybe 6 plus murders right now. And sadly, there is so much more to come, because it is now July of 1913 and Peter sets out to commit yet another murder. But he has a plan, a little trick up his sleeve, because somehow Peter managed to get his hands on a skeleton key. And a skeleton key is sometimes referred to as a master key, and it is a key that can open many doors. For example, in like an apartment building, or maybe student accommodation, or maybe in like a school, college, whatever, there will be a master key or a skeleton key that can open all of the doors in that building with just one key. And honestly, that terrifies me. And somehow Peter had managed to get his hands on one of these keys. And again, we have to remember that we are in 1913. Skeleton keys back then are very different to skeleton keys today, because back then in 1913, around this time, if you had a skeleton key, you couldn't just unlock all of the doors in an apartment building, for example. No. A skeleton key in 1913 could pretty much unlock any door in a whole city. In the hands of someone like Peter, that is terrifying. Most people probably didn't even lock their doors in 1913, so you probably didn't even need a skeleton key, but oh my god, that is terrifying. So in Düsseldorf in 1913, there was 300,000 people living there, and Peter had access to every single one of them. So Peter had a key that could pretty much unlock any home in the whole of Düsseldorf. And he went out on one Saturday evening and he was so excited because it was like, who does he pick? What house does he pick? And he picked out a house that he liked the look of, and he opened the door and let himself in. And once he was inside, he crept upstairs and he came across a 17-year-old girl called Gertrude. She was fast asleep in her bed. And just like he had done with Christine, Peter went up to Gertrude, placed his hands around her throat and just started to choke her. Now she woke up, but Peter just kept squeezing and Gertrude tried to scream out, but Peter had already crushed her vocal cords, so she couldn't make a sound. And Peter watched as Gertrude's life drained out of her. And as this happened, blood actually started to spurt out of Gertrude's throat and out of her mouth. And we all know how much Peter absolutely loves blood. So as soon as he saw this blood, he ejaculated. And then he just walked out of the house. He left Gertrude there. He walked out of the house and he locked the door back up and went on his merry way. So following the murder of Gertrude, and at this point in time, World War I had broken out, and Peter was called up to join the the army and he was sent away. However, as you can probably guess from the first time that he went to the army and ran away, this is exactly what he did for the second time. He soon went AWOL and he deserted his position, and he was caught pretty much straight away, and he was arrested and he was sent to military prison for the rest of the war. So he spent the next 6 years in prison. So after the 6 years, Peter is released and he is currently 37 years old, and he moved in with his sister. And Peter, he seemed to have a little bit of an epiphany. Like, I don't know if something significant happened in prison, like I don't know. But he seemed to have a bit of an epiphany and he wanted to live a good, innocent life. He wanted to turn his life around. He wanted to turn his back on crime. And this is when his sister introduced him to one of her friends, 41-year-old Augusta. And Peter and Augusta, they hit it off straight away. They soon started dating, and it wasn't long until Peter and Augusta went on to get married, which I bet you weren't expecting. The Vampire of Düsseldorf getting married. Really? Now, Augusta is no innocent woman herself. Oh no, she is also a murderer. I bet you weren't expecting that either, were you? No. Because when Augusta was 23, she was in a relationship with a gardener, and it was a pretty good relationship. It lasted for 8 years. They were even engaged. He promised to marry her, but then he jilted her. And Augusta picked up a gun and shot him and killed him instantly. So Augusta was sent to prison for 5 years for the murder of her fiancé. And now later down the line, she was married to Peter Kurten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, the serial killer. But she didn't know about his crimes. He kept it all a secret. But was it a good marriage? No. He treated Augusta like he treated every other woman that he came across. He was incredibly abusive, verbally abusive, physically abusive, and also sexually abusive. He has literally turned into his dad. He would rape Augusta on a regular basis, and he would carry out violent acts during the rape. And he would ask Augusta during the rape to stay perfectly still as if she is dead. And Peter told Augusta if she ever tried to leave him, he would kill her. So Augusta is trapped in this awful marriage, and Peter told her that she must remain faithful to him. But did he extend the same respect to her? Of course he didn't. Peter went on to have a number of affairs. Wow, he was putting it here, there, and everywhere. Oh, and I've also forgot to mention that Peter truly does think that he is God's gift to women. He would spend hours in front of the mirror every single time he went out, like before he went out to have an affair, and he would just stare at himself because he thought that he was so good looking. He would make sure that every single hair was in the most perfect place. He would carry a little duster with him everywhere to like shine his shoes. He also had a skincare routine to make sure that he stayed looking youthful, which there is nothing wrong with a skincare routine. But given the time that we are in, most people didn't have a skincare routine. So one day Peter went out to find a woman to sleep with, and he came across a woman called Maria on the street, and he started talking to her, flirting, and the two of them went back to Maria's house. They started to engage in consensual sex. However, during the sex, Peter started to wrap his hands around Maria's throat, and he just started to strangle her, and he tried to kill her. However, thankfully, she managed to break free, and she ran out into the street calling for help. However, Peter fled through the back door, and he was never caught. On another occasion, Peter started to cheat on his wife with a housemaid called Tida. He started to put the charm on because Peter, when he wanted to be, he was very charming. He gave Tida a fake name. He said that his name was Fritz because at the time in Germany, having an extramarital affair was actually illegal. So Peter didn't want to give his real name, so he told Tida that his name was Fritz. And Tida, she was very young, she was very naive, and they started to have sex, which was consensual, but it was very violent. And Tida was very confused because this is not what she thought sex was, and Peter was actually the first person that she had ever had sex with. But Peter tried to tell her that this extremely violent sex was normal, and he gaslit her into thinking that what he was doing to her was okay. And this violent sexual affair went on for months. And whilst he was having an affair with Tida, he actually started up another affair with another woman called Mek, who he also told this other woman that his name is Fritz. And he was also violently abusing her, raping her, gaslighting her into thinking that violent sex and everything against her will was normal. And the months pass, and I'm sure that Peter is probably having a lot more affairs than we even know about. And Augusta, his wife, eventually found out about the affairs and she kicked Peter out. And this is when Tida and Mek found out that Peter was married. So they went to the police, and because having an affair was illegal, Peter went to prison. He went to prison for 8 months for having an affair. It's just crazy when you realize how many times Peter has gone to prison. How has he gone to prison so many times, but also committed so much crime? So 8 months later, he is released from prison and he goes crawling back to his wife. He went straight back to Augusta and said how sorry he was. He said that he was a changed man, that he wouldn't cheat on her again. And Augusta took him back. He probably did have more affairs, I just don't know about them. However, what he decided to do was go on a huge crime spree around the city of Düsseldorf. And he decided to revisit one of his earlier passions, and that was arson. He started setting huge fires around the city of Düsseldorf. He would set fire to houses, businesses, farms, even whole forests. And in a lot of these fires, people would end up losing their lives. And Peter would just set a fire and sit back and watch. And he would get a sick and twisted thrill about the fact that he was killing people. And when he was literally watching people die, he ejaculated. He also tried to set fire to an orphanage full of children multiple times because he had this fantasy of hearing the children screaming for help and dying. So he tried to set the orphanage on fire multiple times, but thankfully every single time was unsuccessful. In fact, when these fires broke out, because Peter was around, a lot of the time people would ask him for help to put out the fires, which Peter gladly helped because he liked to be in control. I don't think that killing people is ultimately what Peter wants. He just likes to play God. There were some occasions where Peter got so excited and aroused by people asking him for help to put out the fires that he would just run off into the woods and masturbate. I literally have no words. Like, I really don't. Not that I condone violence, but when I was researching this video, I did think to myself, I did. Don't judge my thoughts. Where is Lorena when you need her? Don't judge me. Don't judge me. I'm sorry. I think the world would have been a better place if Lorena had, I don't condone violence though. I don't. So now we get to 1929. Peter is currently 46 years old. And so far, there has been a lot of craziness, hasn't there? But right now, this is where everything hits the fan. Because so far, Peter's crimes have spanned over a couple of decades. And his crimes have been very sporadic. There's been a couple of murders, a couple of rapes, a couple of arsons, theft, abuse, assaults, axes. Like, it's just been very random. It's almost like he's trying to dip his toe into a little bit of everything, see what he likes. And he's had a lot of cool down periods. For Peter, there have been long spans of time where he doesn't commit any crime, which shows you that he does have some control. However, that control now goes out the window because Peter's lust for blood had just become too strong. And over the next 12 months, Peter would embark on possibly the most insane crime sprees I think I've ever come across. And it was because of this crime spree that he eventually got the nickname the Vampire of Düsseldorf. So on the 3rd of February 1929, whilst Peter was on the streets of Düsseldorf, he came across a woman called Apollonia who was walking down the street on her own. And Peter was so confident that no one would see him, no one would witness what he was about to do. He ran up behind Apollonia, grabbed her by her coat, whispered in her ear, "Don't scream, don't scream." He then dragged her into some nearby bushes and pulled out a pair of sharpened scissors and stabbed her 24 times. And obviously she was pouring with blood, so Peter ejaculated. He then ran away, all happy that he had murdered somebody else. But then in the newspaper a few days later, there was an article about the crime, but it said that Apollonia had survived the attack. And Peter was furious. He was like, how could she survive? I stabbed her like 24 times. He wanted to kill somebody and this woman had survived. How dare she? So just 5 days later, he went out onto the streets of Düsseldorf to attack again. And this is what I mean. He has no control anymore. It is really, really escalating now. This time, Peter was stood lurking outside of his local church, and he came across a young girl, a girl named Rosa. She was walking alone and she was only 8 years old. And Peter went up to Rosa and he said, "Hi, how are you? Where are you heading to today?" And poor innocent Rosa, she was only 8 years old. She just responded, "Oh, hi. Everything's fine with me. I'm just heading home." And Peter said, "Well, why don't I join you? Why don't I walk with you?" And the sweet, innocent, poor girl agreed. She said, "Yes, okay." So they started walking off down the street together. But then as soon as no one else was around, Peter dragged the poor girl off the street, wrapped his hands around her throat, and strangled her until she passed away. And following this, Peter tried to sexually assault the girl after she had died. Yep, he is engaging in necrophilia. It's just absolutely horrific. This is what I meant when I said in the beginning of this video that this case really does include everything. I have never, ever known a serial killer that has so many interests, that gets aroused by so many things. So Peter starts to sexually assault the girl, but it's not enough for him because he needs to see blood. So he pulled out his pair of scissors, which has become his weapon of choice. And that, again, I've never actually heard of a serial killer choosing a pair of scissors as their weapon of choice. So he pulls out his pair of scissors and he just starts to repeatedly stab Rosa in the chest. And obviously she has only just passed away, so her chest, it starts pouring with blood. He then started to bash Rosa's temple repeatedly against a rock until her head started to bleed. And then of course when Peter saw all of the blood coming from Rosa, he ejaculated immediately. And she was only 8 years old. He kills children, he kills women, he kills men. He doesn't care who he kills. He doesn't care who he hurts. But that is not all that he did to Rosa. Peter did something that he has never done to a human before. Something that would give him the name the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Because as Peter was kneeling over Rosa's body, watching the blood pour from her head, this completely new urge came over him. And that was the urge to drink Rosa's blood, which was probably just a natural progression for him because he was so obsessed with blood. And the thought of drinking her blood was so arousing to him that he bent down and pressed his lips to Rosa's temple and he just started to drink her blood. And Peter has described this sensation as being like a drug to him. And as he was drinking her blood, he ejaculated again. How could he do all of that to an 8-year-old girl? Like, how could he do that to anyone but a child? And after this absolutely sadistic and brutal murder, Peter went home, he cleaned himself up, and then he went off to the movies. And then when he was walking back from the movies, he actually went back to the scene of the crime and he wanted to go and look at Rosa's body again to see if it had been discovered, which it hadn't been so far. So Peter decided to set Rosa's body on fire, just for the fun of it. And the next morning, Rosa's body was found, but no one could link it back to Peter. And after this, the attacks just keep on coming. Only 4 days after the murder of Rosa, Peter went out looking for another victim. On the night of the 12th of February 1929, Peter went out looking for a female victim that would be on her own. However, after having no luck of finding a woman on her own, a drunken man stumbled out of a pub and stumbled right into Peter. The drunk man then got angry with Peter, and in response to this, Peter pulled out his pair of scissors and stabbed the man in the neck. And once the man fell on the floor, Peter just kept repeatedly stabbing him. And eventually, because of all the blood, Peter ejaculated. And then, because his new thing is drinking blood, Peter then lowered his lips to the man's neck and just started drinking his blood. The next day, Peter again returned to the scene of the crime. Police were already there trying to figure out who had murdered this man. And onlookers were talking about how terrible the murder was. And Peter got so excited that people people were talking about his murder that he just started masturbating right there in public. And then over the next few weeks, Peter carried on with his violent crime spree. And his attacks on people, they wouldn't always end up in murder. But Peter didn't care. Like I said, I don't think his aim is necessarily to murder people. He just wants to launch an attack. He just wants to see blood. Sometimes Peter would just attack people until he climaxed. And then if they weren't dead, he didn't care. He would just run off. Like there was this one time where he ran up to this woman and literally just started to strangle her, but then he ejaculated pretty much straight away and then he ran off before he killed her. There was another woman that he dragged into the woods, but she ended up actually attacking him with her umbrella. So she got out her umbrella and whacked Peter over the head with her umbrella, but it turns out that Peter actually liked this. Being hit with the umbrella made Peter aroused and he ejaculated. And after this, he just pushed the woman down a hill in the woods and then he ran off. Can you believe he just ejaculated over being hit with an umbrella? There was another time where Peter went on a date with a woman and they went to a coffee shop and Peter started to grope the woman under the table, and in response to this, she slapped him, and in response to being slapped, Peter then punched her in the face, causing her lip to bleed. And when the woman's lip started to bleed, Peter literally jumped up, sucked on her lip, started sucking her blood in the coffee shop in front of everyone, ejaculated, and then ran off. It has seriously gotten to the point where Peter is ejaculating over everything. And over the next few weeks, Peter actually does go on to commit many more murders, but we don't know the exact details of all of these murders. But Peter went round and murdered a few more people and he sucked their blood. And by this time, police had finally clocked on that there was a serial killer in the city of Düsseldorf that was drinking people's blood. And I honestly don't know how the police knew that someone was going around drinking their blood. Like, I actually don't know that. Maybe there was teeth marks in like necks and wherever, I don't know. But the police needed the help of the local newspaper to try and catch this serial killer. And obviously the newspapers, it doesn't matter what time you are in, the newspapers are going to run with a story like this. And this is when Peter got given the nickname the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And truly, everyone in Düsseldorf was so scared because there was this crazy serial killer on the loose drinking people's blood. And Peter started to panic that he was going to get caught. But it turns out that they wouldn't catch him. No, because someone else actually came forward and confessed to his crimes. Unbelievably, there was also another serial killer on the loose in Düsseldorf at the same time. A man named Hans Strasberg. And Hans liked to go around strangling people by running up behind them and placing a noose on their neck. So when Hans was caught, he was being interviewed and he confessed to all of the Vampire of Düsseldorf's crimes. He clearly decided that he wanted more notoriety and he confessed to more murders than he had actually committed. So the police were rubbing their hands together thinking, great, we have gotten this crazy serial killer, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, off the streets. It is unbelievable that there was two serial killers active at the same time. And Hans was actually committed to an asylum after he got caught and he was never released. And Peter, for right now, has gotten away with his crimes. So over the next couple of months, Peter actually laid low because the police were convinced that they had caught the Vampire of Düsseldorf, but of course they hadn't. And in August of 1929, Peter decided to strike again. So this time, Peter came across a woman sitting on her own on a park bench. This woman was called Maria Hahn, and Peter went over to her. The two of them started chatting, and Peter convinced Maria to go on a date with him later on that evening. So on the evening, the two of them went to a restaurant. They then went for a walk in the park afterwards. The two of them started to have consensual sex in the park, but Peter wasn't feeling it because it was just regular sex and that was not his cup of tea. So he just started to strangle Maria. But again, this was not enough. He needed to see blood. So he pulled out a pair of scissors and he stabbed Maria over and over again. He stabbed her 10 times in the chest, 7 times in the neck, and 3 times in the side of the head. And then Peter started to drink her blood, and he carried on pleasuring himself and drinking Maria's blood over the next hour. And then after, Peter just rolled Maria's body into a ditch, and he just went home and went to bed and went back to his wife, because I think it's very easy to forget that he has a wife, and he was expecting his wife to be asleep. However, his wife was awake. His wife was stood in the door waiting for him, and he was covered head to toe in blood. And his wife was like, what is going on? Why are you covered in blood? And Peter had to think quick on his feet, and he just said that he'd gotten into an argument with someone and they got in a fight. And his wife, I don't know if she believed this story, but she just dropped it. However, the next day, Peter woke up and thought, it's going to look very suspicious if a body turns up and my wife saw me covered in blood. So Peter decides to go back to the scene of the crime, see Maria's body, which hadn't been found at this point, and he decided to bury her in a shallow grave so no one would be able to find her. And knowing Peter, he probably ejaculated whilst doing it. And now that Peter had broken the seal on his short cooldown period, he could just no longer control himself, and he just started murdering and attacking people at will. Over the next couple of weeks, he went on to choke a girl called Annie, and he dumped her body in the river. He also went on to stab a number of people in the street at night, including a girl called Anna, who he stabbed in the left breast, a woman named Frau, and then also he stabbed a man called Heinrich, and he stabbed him in the back. And then Peter went back to killing people left, right and centre and drinking their blood. And people soon started to realise, and the police, that the Vampire of Düsseldorf was still out there. And then on the 24th of August 1929, Peter went on to commit 2 more absolutely horrific murders because a local fun fair was in town, and Peter was kind of like stalking around, like scoping the place out, potentially looking for victims. And he saw these 2 young girls, 5-year-old Gertrude and 14-year-old Louisa. And he started chatting to them. And he said to the 14-year-old girl if she could go into the fun fair and buy him some cigarettes. And if she did that, she could earn some money. So the 14-year-old, thinking, oh, I'm going to earn some money here, immediately agreed. But she said that she would have to take her younger sister with her. But Peter said to Louisa, the 14-year-old girl, oh, no, don't worry about your sister. I'll look after her. And Louisa was young, she was naive, and she trusted Peter. So Louisa went into the fun fair to buy him some cigarettes, and Peter was now alone with 5-year-old Gertrude. And as soon as Louisa was out of sight, Peter dragged 5-year-old Gertrude into the woodland area by the fun fair and slit her throat. He then went back to the edge of the fun fair to wait for Louisa, who soon came out with cigarettes. Peter took the cigarettes off of her, and Louisa said, where's my sister? And then Peter also grabbed Louisa and dragged her into the woods, dragged her to her sister's body, who he has just murdered, and Louisa saw her dead sister on the ground. Louisa started screaming, and Peter got an enjoyment out of watching her pain, and then he proceeded to slit Louisa's throat. And then following this, Peter spent the rest of the evening drinking blood from both of them whilst pleasuring himself. The next day, the bodies of the 2 girls were found by onlookers, and Peter went back to the scene of the crime. He really likes to do that, doesn't he? So he went back to the scene of the crime, and people were talking about the murders, and he got so excited that he ejaculated into his pants. And Peter enjoyed the murder of those 2 young girls so much that he actually took a woman on a date the next day to the fun fair, dragged her into the woods, took her to the same location that he murdered these 2 girls, where he then raped her and started hitting her over the head with a hammer. He's now changed his weapon to a hammer, and I think he did this to throw the police off because the police were looking for somebody running around with scissors. And Peter was hitting this woman so hard with a hammer that the hammer actually broke. So Peter, no longer able to beat the woman with the hammer, just started licking up her blood. He then ejaculated and he ran away. And it turns out that the woman amazingly survived. I don't know how. She has been hit a number of times on the head with a hammer, but because of like the head injury and because it was so dark, she couldn't really give the police police too many details, and the police were still no closer to catching the Vampire of Düsseldorf. But it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Peter does not give up. Like, it's crazy, the escalation. Like, over these 12 months, he commits so many attacks and so many murders. He seems to have no fear of getting caught. He has so much confidence. But things do eventually come crashing down on him, I promise, and it will be soon. However, in the next couple of months before he is caught, he goes on to attack numerous women. And honestly, the list is just so long. The women are called Lena, Sophie, Maria, Ida, Elizabeth, Frau. There's just so many women. There is even another Gertrude. It's just, oh my god, I cannot get over how many women he is attacking. And with all of these women, he attacks them at night. He rapes them. He starts to choke them. Some of them he does stab, make them bleed, drink their blood. He maybe even thinks that he's killed some of them, but he doesn't. All of the women that I've just listed, they survive. And then on the 7th of November, 1929, Peter goes on to commit one of his most horrific murders yet. Because one day he comes across 5-year-old Gertrude. And this is a different 5-year-old Gertrude than what we were just talking about a few moments ago. And there is actually so many Gertrudes in this case. It does get very confusing. So one day Peter abducts 5-year-old Gertrude from the street. Peter drags her body to a secluded area behind someone's home. And then he proceeds to stab this 5-year-old child nearly 50 times. But it gets worse. It gets so much worse. Peter then sexually assaults her dead body, again engaging in necrophilia. He then drinks her blood, ejaculates, tries to set her body alight, and then he flees the scene. He has to be one of the worst people we have covered. Like, I don't know. How do you define what is worse? Like, how can you do that? But the last serial killer that made me feel like this was Bob Berdella. And following this murder of Gertrude, because no one could find Peter, he really did think that he was invincible. And he thought that he was so invincible, and his ego was so big that he wrote a letter himself to a local newspaper. And we do see this with serial killers. They get so ahead of themselves. They get so cocky. So they get in contact with the police or the media, and they're just taunting everybody like, oh, you can't catch me. I'm right here. So in a handwritten letter, Peter writes to a local newspaper the location of 2 more victims, and he includes a little map and everything. He details where he has hidden 5-year-old Gertrude's body, the last victim that we have just talked about, and also the location of Maria Hahn, who, if you remember, was the victim that he killed and then went back to his wife and he was covered in blood. So then he went back and buried Maria Hahn's body in a shallow grave so no one would find it. That was Maria. And Peter has written directions as to where he buried Maria. And the newspaper shared this letter with the police, and the police did in fact find the bodies of Gertrude and of Maria. And it was so embarrassing for the police because the Vampire of Düsseldorf hadn't been caught, and he was now just taunting them. For the next few months, from November 1929 all the way to February of 1930, Peter laid low again because the heat was really on him at this point. The police were everywhere determined to catch him. However, by the time we get to February, he just cannot control his urges anymore. And he went back on the streets of Düsseldorf and started raping and strangling women again, just randomly attacking anyone that he could. In April, he wanted to murder again. And this is when he met a woman called Charlotte. Charlotte had agreed to go on a date with Peter, but she was really nervous on this date. And Peter actually said to her, oh, why are you so nervous? You don't think I'm the Vampire of Düsseldorf, do you? I can't believe he actually said that to her. And she just kind of like laughed it off and said, oh, no, I don't think that. So after the date, they went for a walk in the park. And this is when Peter attacked her with a hammer. However, she put her hands in front of her face to block the blows. Peter ended up breaking and crushing all of the bones in her hands and her fingers. But the fact that she had put her hands over her face, this saved her life. But because she was bleeding so much, she passed out, and Peter, of course, ejaculated and ran off. And he was convinced that Charlotte had lost her life. But she hadn't. But Charlotte didn't know Peter's real name or any details about him, so even though she survived, she couldn't give the police any details. And it really does feel like Peter is going to get away with this for the rest of his life. It just feels like, how are the police ever going to catch him? But thankfully, we are now coming to Peter's final victim. So on the 14th of May 1930, Peter was just hanging around at a train station, probably being a creep and probably looking for a victim, if I'm being completely honest. And when he was at the train station, he saw a young woman basically being harassed by another man. So Peter, trying to be the hero, went over and actually protected the woman. He stepped in between them and he basically told the other man to get lost. And he saved Maria from a potentially dangerous situation. And Maria was so thankful. And it's just so crazy that the Vampire of Düsseldorf has just saved a woman from another idiot, potential predator. We just don't know. So Maria and Peter, they got chatting and they instantly hit it off. Now, Peter actually kind of liked Maria. He instantly had a thing for her and he wanted to have sex with her and not kill her, which was a big deal for Peter because he pretty much wanted to kill everybody. So Peter did something that he had never done before. He invited Maria back to his apartment. Like, he seriously liked Maria, and this is very significant. So significant that if he hadn't have invited Maria back to his apartment, God knows when he would have been caught. So Peter and Maria go back to his apartment and Peter asks her if she wants to have sex and Maria says no. And unbelievably, Peter respects her answer. I am shocked. That is probably the most shocking thing about this case when it comes to Peter. He accepts that she says no. Peter just went, okay then. And he asked her if she wanted to be escorted to the train station so she wouldn't have to walk alone. Again, I'm like, oh my God. Peter is actually being nice to someone for a change. It's crazy. So the two of them head off. They start walking towards the train station. However, Peter doesn't stay nice for very long. He can't resist his urges any longer and he drags Maria to a secluded area where he rapes her. But it turns out that Peter's lust for blood didn't come out this time. And Peter was satisfied with just raping Maria, which again is something completely different. Like, that is not normal for Peter. And he just lets Maria go. Now, Maria, after this, was completely traumatized and she wanted to talk to somebody about it, but she didn't want to go to the police because she thought that the police wouldn't believe her. So she decided to write down what had happened to her in a letter and she wanted to post it to a friend. However, she hadn't addressed the letter properly, so the letter was being held at the local post office. And someone from the post office ended up opening the letter to try and find out who had sent it to send the letter back. And they read the letter and they handed the letter over to the police. And from the details of the assault, the police could tell that the attacker was the Vampire of Düsseldorf. So the police tracked down Maria and they asked Maria if she knew any details about the man that had attacked her, and Maria said, yes, I know where he lives. Like I said, it was very significant that he took her back to his apartment. So on the 21st of May 1930, Maria led the police directly to Peter's apartment. And the police were going door to door, speaking to all of the neighbours, trying to get as much information about the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And at that exact moment, Peter, aka the Vampire of Düsseldorf, walked in through the front door of the apartment block, and the police and Maria turn and they all look at him, and Peter is literally there in the doorway and he's like shell shocked, and Maria is like, that's him. The police charge at Peter, but unbelievably, Peter gets away. He gets away. How? He's literally stood right there. And over the next couple of days, Peter hides out in a motel room and he is panicking like crazy in this motel room because he's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. They know what I look like. They're going to catch me. Maria knows where I live. They will now know where my wife lives. And he could not see a way out of this. He realized that the game was finally up and he was going to have to hand himself in. However, he wanted to do one more thing before he handed himself in. And that was speak to his wife. It's crazy, isn't it, when you remember he has a wife. He's had a wife for the past decade and he has killed so many people. So his wife, Augusta, even though she was trapped in this very abusive marriage, over that 10-year marriage, Peter had actually grown quite fond of her. He actually quite liked that she had stuck around, that she had put up with all of his BS. So he came up with a plan. So on the 23rd of May, 2 days after he fled from the police on foot, he snuck his way back into his apartment and he spoke face to face with his wife and he confessed to everything to his wife. Like, I mean everything. And oh my God, can you even imagine like your partner walking through the door and confessing to everything that Peter has done? And Augusta was understandably angry. She was upset, she was hurt, she was horrified. She couldn't believe the man that she was married to. And she actually couldn't hold herself together. She collapsed on the floor and she had a complete breakdown. And this is when Peter finally told Augusta his plan, that there was a large amount of money being offered to anyone that had information that would lead to the arrest of the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And Peter wanted his wife Augusta to hand him in so she would get the reward money. He was trying to do a nice thing in Peter's sick and twisted way. He felt really guilty about the fact that he had now been caught and that he was going to go away for the rest of his life, and Augusta would just be left with nothing, and he wanted to leave her money. It's all very weird, isn't it? So Peter ran off and he took shelter in his local church, and this is when Augusta phoned the police and told them exactly where her husband was. The police stormed the church, and this is finally when Peter Kurten, aka the Vampire of Düsseldorf, is finally caught and arrested. Peter put up no resistance whatsoever, and when he was interviewed, he gave a full and frank confession. His confession was so detailed. Peter actually has a very, very good memory. He was able to remember every single one of his crimes in vivid detail. In fact, he knew so much detail that he was later interviewed by a psychiatrist, a man called Dr. Berg, who wrote a whole ass book on Peter. Like, there is a whole ass book on Peter out there, and that is actually how we know so much about Peter Kurten, aka the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And that book is what I actually used for my research on this case, and you can go and read it if you want. I personally wouldn't recommend it. It's not the best book. I mean, you've got to remember when it was written, the language that they use, it's very old-fashioned. And as Peter was talking to Dr. Berg about his crimes, he was getting so aroused. And I don't know this for sure, but knowing Peter, he probably ejaculated everywhere. At the end of the interview, Peter confessed to 70 separate assaults, 9 of which were confirmed murders, and a lot of those assaults could also be possible murders. The problem was that Peter didn't actually know if he had killed any of these people because he just fled the scene before he actually could confirm. But Peter confessed to attempting to murder at least 31 people, and only 9 have been confirmed. And in April of 1931, Peter finally went to trial. He showed no remorse whatsoever. The courtroom was packed every single day because people just wanted a glimpse of the Vampire of Düsseldorf. The defense did try to put up the defense of insanity. However, that was quickly dismissed because it was discovered that Peter, he was completely competent. He knew what he was doing was wrong. And the trial only lasted 10 days and he was found guilty on all charges and he was sentenced to death by guillotine. And in July of 1931, only 3 months after the trial, Peter was led out into the grounds of the prison where a guillotine waited for him. He was asked if he had any last words and he said, quote, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Those were his exact words, his exact last words. Again, he is still getting excited and aroused by the thought of hearing his own blood. But no one replied, and Peter Kurten was beheaded, and the crimes of the Vampire of Düsseldorf were finally over. And just in case you were wondering what happened to Peter's head, now I'm sure most of you are not wondering what happened to Peter's head, but just in case if you were, it was examined to see if there was any abnormalities in his mind, which again, I need to remind you all that this is 1931 and they found nothing. Well, it turns out that Peter's head, it was mummified and it is available for public viewing. You heard that right. Peter Kurten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, his head is on display and you can find it in the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, which is located in the city of Wisconsin Dells in the USA. So if you are from that city, Wisconsin Dells, is that actually a city or is it Wisconsin State? I don't know. But if you are from there, if you are anywhere near that museum, if you have been to that museum, oh my God, let me know. I would put a picture up on the screen of his mummified head. However, YouTube won't like that. So if you just Google Peter Kurten, it comes up if you want to see it. I don't know. If you don't, then don't Google him. But wow, that just blows my mind that there is a serial killer's head on display, like his actual head. And that is the end of the case of Peter Kurten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And that was a roller coaster of a case. And it was definitely confusing at times. Some of the things that we have talked about in this video, I never thought would ever leave my mouth. Like, I can't believe it. And I also cannot believe how many times I said the word ejaculated. And I'm sure one of you was probably keeping count. And I'm sure you're going to tell me how many times I said that word in the comments. And I bet you it's a lot. But I don't really have anything to say about Peter. He's definitely one of the most sexually motivated perpetrators I've ever come across. I can't believe how sexually aroused he was by blood. Like, I can't believe it. But to be honest, he was sexually aroused by so many things. It really does just baffle me, actually, this case. I don't think I've ever come across a serial killer that is into so many things. Like, he just killed indiscriminately men, women, children. There was sometimes a sexual element, but then sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes he would just attack somebody with a knife or scissors or a hammer. Then there was arson involved, bestiality, necrophilia. I just can't believe how many things he was into. Not many serial killers are like that. Normally they have their thing and they kind of just stick to it. But Peter, he kind of wanted to try everything. And I just can't believe how long he was getting away with his crimes. And I also can't believe that he actually murdered for the first time when he was 9 years old. I just can't believe it. Like, this case is just unbelievable from the very beginning to the very end. And as for the victims of today's case, even though I do know the names of some of the victims, I don't know any details about them. Given that this case took place so long ago, there is just nothing on the victims out there. But I just feel so sorry for anybody that came into contact with Peter. The whole city of Düsseldorf was scared of him, and that must have just been so horrible to live through. So that brings us to the end of our final Halloween case. Back to regular scheduled cases next week, which are no better really, are they? As always, let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions on today's case, and don't forget to leave me your case suggestions down below because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.